Are you there?
Yes, you able to hear me?
Yes, I am.
Okay, and you're able to see me as well, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, there are a few things to say before we start tonight's story, and I'll just indicate to people that we'll be doing this in two parts, one this week, and that we'll probably have to conclude it next week, depending. It's a relatively more lengthy story by Edgar Poe, The Mystery of Marie Rogêt. And in one part, in one sense, Poe explains the relevance of this story, including to you himself, in a note that he appended to the story. Um, and I think perhaps the best way to do this, and so that we can just jump into it rather than me explain more. Um, Jose, if you have the story there, do you have the note? Do you see that there upon the original publication? Do you see that? If you don't,
No,
I can read it.
I don't think I do. Let me see.
See what the text is that you have, because we should also project it if possible.
Sure, coming up. Here is what I have. Here is what I have.
Okay, fine. So then I'll read the note that's appended to this story, because herein lies the importance of understanding how ideas work. Let me explain something before I say this. We're going to we can If you think that you will ever be told that a nuclear war is going to happen and that you now have X amount of time to seek shelter, you're sadly mistaken. That's never going to occur. You might be told, as people were told once some years ago in Florida, that you have 38 minutes. You may get that kind of a notice, but you're never going to get a notice that that's going to occur. In the image of that fact, many people, most people, decide to believe it would never occur. Well, ask yourself this question. If nuclear war will never occur, how come all these weapons exist? And how come new regimes of weapons are created? And how come the negotiations around these weapons, including arms limitation negotiations of various types, are often violated by various powers? The notion that these weapons will never be used is supremely foolish in a country which is the only country on the planet to have used them. 80 years ago, next week, we dropped a nuclear warhead on August 6th on the city of Hiroshima, which had little or no military significance to Japan whatsoever, and on the city of Nagasaki, which was a similar, though not identical, case. That is, that there was no ostensible military reason to drop that bomb on that city. Many things have been said often about how this saved 1 million American lives and that's why the atomic weapon was dropped. But even if you believed that, you couldn't come up with a reason that Hiroshima had to be attacked. Uh, we will, in the course of the next few weeks, be speaking quite a bit about this, especially with the psychologist Dr. Akiko Mikamu, whose father was at near ground zero of the blast in Hiroshima, and also her mother was as well. And they both survived. Uh, we will be able to tell people what the nuclear holocaust looks like from inside of the nuclear disaster or catastrophe. All the time that we think where these things are discussed, uh, the instances in which people believe they are getting a description, you're always getting a description from the standpoint of the people that dropped the bomb, or someone that is analyzing the incident from outside of the incident. But from the inside of the incident, that's very different. Um, this story by Poe talks about a case in New York. And here's what he had to say. He said, upon the original publication of this story, Marie Rogêt. The footnotes now appended were considered unnecessary, but the lapse of several years since the tragedy upon which the tale is based renders it expedient to give them, and also to say a few words in explanation of the general design. A young girl, Mary Cecilia Rogers, was murdered in the vicinity of New York. And although her death occasioned an intense and long enduring excitement, the mystery attending it had remained unsolved at the period when the present paper was written and published, which was in November of 1842. Poe would have been 33 years old, by the way, at that point. Herein, under the pretense of relating the fate of a Parisian grisette, that means a French young working class woman. Grisette means the color gray, is a color of and refers to the fabric of the dresses, kind of woolen fabric, which were worn by young women that worked in the garment districts. Under the pretense of relating the fate of a Parisian grisette, the author has followed in minute detail the essential, while merely paralleling the inessential facts of the real murder of Mary Rogers. Thus, all argument founded upon the fiction is applicable to the truth, and the investigation of the truth was the object. So let's be clear. Poe was looking at a real murder that happened in the vicinity of New York. And in order to discuss it, what he did was write a story. And he set the story in Paris rather than in New York. So he goes on. The mystery of Marie Rogêt was composed at a distance from the scene of the atrocity, and with no other means of investigation than the newspapers afforded. Thus much escaped the writer, of which he could have availed himself had he been upon the spot and visited the localities. It may not be improper to record, nevertheless, that the confessions of two persons, one of them, the Madame de Luc of the narrative, made at different periods, long subsequent to the publication, confirmed in full not only the general conclusion, but absolutely all the chief hypothetical details by which that conclusion was attained. So what Poe is saying is he wrote a story taking just what he had from the newspapers, and he solved the case by writing this story. That's what he said happened. And this conclusion has never been successfully challenged. That is, that Poe did solve the murder. And the story was his presentation of the means by which he thought of the solution. Now, this is important to state because this is the actual function of art. Not all art, but that's how he used it. So Poe, who lived in the Bronx and whose cottage is very nearby our office, actually, some of us visited there recently, was not what people think he was. He wasn't a romantic. He wasn't a drunk. He wasn't a drug addict. And he was something that people don't know he was, which was that he was an intelligence agent. And so we read these stories, not because he was an intelligence agent, but we read these stories because he proposed that there was a method by which one could think that one could discover the solutions to mysteries. Why is that important to you? Your whole life is a mystery. You're in a country which is going to war after war that you never endorse, but you always pay for, and which never benefits you and doesn't benefit the other people in the country. It does benefit the people who are arms manufacturers to some degree, and it certainly benefits people outside of the country in various ways. What it does to you and what it does to the country is it impoverishes the country, it demoralizes the country, it degrades the country, and it enslaves the country. And you are living, as was once said in a infamous movie of the 1990s, you are living as a slave. You know something's wrong, you feel it, but you don't know what it is. Hmm? And it's like a splinter in your brain. That's your life. You say, "Well, it's not my life. I feel wonderful about my life." Well, in that case, you may be living foolishly, because I can tell you that when you're told something about two nuclear submarines that are, quote, going near Russia, if that strikes you as being something to become suddenly terrified by, let me explain to you that the forces, the most powerful nuclear military force in the world is not the United States. It is Russia. And because of things done by recent American administrations, including the Obama administration and the Bush administration, the Russians changed their military doctrine to parallel that of the United States. Now, here's something that you probably don't know. The United States is committed to blowing up any other nation in the world that it wants without any notice whatsoever. That's right, your country, and therefore you, are committed to blowing up with nuclear weapons any other country that it wants at any time. Not because a war starts, not because that country has done anything at all. It's not a launch. It's a preemptive strike policy of first use of weapons. Back in the 1980s, Ronald Reagan and Mikhail Gorbachev met in Reykjavik, Iceland, and they had a discussion. And at that point, they put out a joint declaration saying nuclear war cannot be won and must never be fought. That was then, but this is now. And there are people, including lunatics, who believe that nuclear war can be won and can be fought. That's not necessarily Donald Trump, nor am I saying it is Donald Trump. But what I want to be clear with you about is that there is no such thing as a weapon which will never be used. If you have nuclear weapons, they will at some point be used. But the problem is, if they are used, the majority of people in the human race will die, and the lucky ones will be the ones that die in the blast. The ones that are still alive, who will be killed by the radioactivity, etc., they are the people who will die the worst possible death. And there's another corollary. If you believe there will be only one nuclear exchange, then you don't understand nuclear war. Nuclear war begins with an atomic exchange, then it goes to biological and chemical warfare, and it goes to the multiple use of thermonuclear weapons. So you're talking about something that once it launches, there's nothing you can do about it. Some of us have spent the entirety of our adult lives organizing in one form or another against that. I'm one of those people. And we don't find that to be, it may be an unusual life, but there's nothing particularly anxiety producing about it. Because you have to realize that this is the world that you must change, or this is the world which grips you and takes you in a direction of an inevitable tragedy that you may survive because you may die before that occurs. So you may die of old age, you may die because of accident, you may die because of a disease, and therefore you may never know. But one can know that that is a fate that for us to survive it, for us to defeat it, for us to overcome that fate, requires a different kind of thinking where we are not mystified, where we can resolve mysteries. We can know and name the names of the people that are perpetrating these wars. That's a process that's right now underway in the United States. That's what a lot of people are very confused about. So they kind of compare what Tulsi Gabbard is doing to the Epstein files, to this or that, whatever happens to come their way, whatever they happen to pick out of the media garbage can. And they say, oh, this is what I've got to pay attention to. No, what we have to pay attention to is your own soul. What you have to pay attention to is the idea, as was once said by a now deceased old songwriter, it's winter in America. Nobody is fighting because nobody knows what to save. Save your soul. Now, the terror, as Poe once said, is not in his stories. He didn't write terror stories or horror stories. He used to say, the terror is in your soul, not in the story. And so the idea of these mystery stories, there are several of them, is to investigate how to think in such a way as to resolve mysteries, to not be the slave of those that would mystify you, and not be the slave of your own axioms, your own prejudices, your own assumptions that lead you to a tragic end. So this story is called The Mystery of Marie Rogêt, a sequel to The Murders in the Rue Morgue. And what I want to do is have some volunteers read, and we'll project the story on the screen. And I believe we should just probably read the motto of the story, which is there translated, Jose.
Yeah.
So why don't you start us off, and we'll get as far as we can by 7 o'clock, which means we got about a half an hour for this, and we'll then conclude it next week.
I have a couple of different versions pulled up too, Dennis. So if the version that I'm using at some point is just way off track, just, let me know, and then we can switch to another one.
Okay. And so people just know why that is. That's because there are multiple versions, sometimes intended to make the story less accessible. So we often look at multiple versions. And why don't you go ahead and get it started?
Okay, The Mystery of Marie Rogêt, a sequel to The Murders in the Rue Morgue by Edgar A. Poe. So I guess there's the German. I'll just go right to the English. Those are different, right?
That's right. You should start it. There are ideal series of events.
Okay. There are ideal series of events which run parallel with the real ones. They rarely coincide. Men and circumstances generally modify the ideal train of events so that it seems imperfect, and its consequences are equally imperfect. Thus, with the Reformation, instead of Protestantism came Lutheranism. Novalis moral Anishten. There are few persons, even among the calmest thinkers, who have not occasionally been startled into a vague yet thrilling half-credence in the supernatural by coincidences of so seemingly marvelous a character that, as mere coincidences, the intellect has been unable to receive them. Such sentiments, for the half-credences of which I speak, I have never the full force of thought. Such sentiments are seldom thoroughly stifled unless by reference to the doctrine of chance, or, as it is technically termed, the calculus of probabilities. Now, this calculus is, in its essence, purely mathematical, and thus we have the anomaly of the most rigidly exact in science applied to the shadow in spirituality of the most intangible in speculation. The extraordinary details which I am now called upon to make public will be found to form, as regards sequence of time, the primary branch of a series of scarcely intelligible coincidences, whose secondary or concluding branch will be recognized by all readers in the late murder of Mary Cecilia Rogers at New York. When in an article entitled The Murders in the Rue Morgue, I endeavored, about a year ago, to depict some very remarkable features in the mental character of my friend, the Chevalier C. Auguste Dupin, it did not occur to me that I should ever resume the subject. This depicting of character constituted my design, and this design was thoroughly fulfilled in the wild train of circumstances brought to instance Dupin's idiosyncrasy. I might have adduced other examples, but I should have proven no more. Late events, however, in their surprising development, have startled me into some farther details, which will carry with them the air of extorted confession. Hearing what I have lately heard, it would be indeed strange should I remain silent in regard to what I both heard and saw so long ago. Upon the winding up of the tragedy involved in the deaths of Madame L'Espanaye and her daughter, the Chevalier dismissed the affair at once from his attention and relapsed into his old habits of moody reverie. Prone at all times to abstraction, I readily fell in with his humor, and continuing to occupy our chambers in the Faubourg Saint Germain, we gave the future to the winds and slumbered tranquilly in the present, weaving the dull world around us into dreams. But these dreams were not altogether uninterrupted. It may readily be supposed that the part played by my friend in the drama at the Rue Morgue had not failed of its impression upon the fancies of the Parisian police. With its emissaries, the name of Dupin had grown into a household word. The simple character of those inductions by which he had disentangled the mystery never having been explained, even to the prefect, or to any other individual than myself, of course, is not surprising that the affair was regarded as little less than miraculous, or that the Chevalier's analytical abilities acquired for him the credit of intuition. His frankness would have led him to disabuse every inquirer of such prejudice, but his indolent humor forbade all farther agitation on a topic whose interest to himself had long ceased. It thus happened that he found himself the cynosure of the political eyes, and the cases were not few in which attempt was made to engage his services at the prefecture. The only instance, nevertheless, in which such attempt proved successful was the instance to which I have already alluded, that of the murder of a young girl named Marie Rogêt. This event occurred about 2 years after the atrocity in the Rue Morgue. Marie, whose Christian and family name will at once arrest attention from their resemblance to those of the unfortunate Seeger girl, was the only daughter of the widow Estelle Rogêt. The father had died during the child's infancy, and from the period of his death until within 18 months before the assassination, which forms the subject of our narrative, the mother and daughter had dwelt together in the Rue Pavée Saint-André, Madame there keeping a pension, assisted by Marie. Affairs went on thus until the latter had attained her 22nd year, when her great beauty attracted the notice of a perfumer who occupied one of the shops in the basement of the Palais Royal, and whose custom lay chiefly among the desperate adventurers infesting that neighborhood. Monsieur Leblanc was not unaware of the advantages to be derived from the attendance of the fair Marie in his parfumerie, and his liberal proposals were accepted eagerly by the girl, but with somewhat more of hesitation by Madame.
Okay, stop for a minute, just I want people to know. So the Rue Pavée Saint Andre is actually Nassau Street in New York. And this Monsieur LeBlanc's actual name was Anderson. So remember, because what this is a story about New York, but it's set in France, so things have changed. And it says that Dupin was the cynosure of the police. It means he was the avatar, he was the standard, he was the person against which, that everybody wanted to seek out to help them solve cases. That's what that meant. Do we have another reader, by the way?
Yes, we do. We have a good pool of readers.
Can we get somebody up? Let's make sure we have two people so that
ready to go. Okay, all right, here you go. We got one coming up, and then the other one's ready to go after him. Go ahead, Robert. The anticipations? Yes, that's where we were, right? The anticipations is where we left.
Right.
The anticipations of the shopkeeper were realized, and his rooms soon became notorious through the charms of the sprightly grisette. She had been in his employ about a year when her admirers were thrown into confusion by her sudden disappearance from the shop. Monsieur Leblanc was unable to account for her absence, and Madame Rogêt was distracted with anxiety and terror. The public papers immediately took up the theme, and the police were upon the point of making serious investigations when, one fine morning, after the lapse of a week, Marie, in good health but with a somewhat saddened air, made her reappearance at her usual counter in the perfumery. All inquiry, except that of a private character, was of course immediately hushed. Monsieur Leblanc professed total ignorance as before. Marie, with Madame, replied to all questions that the last week had been spent at the house of a relation in the country. Thus the affair died away and was generally forgotten, for the girl, ostensibly to relieve herself from the impertinence of curiosity, soon bade a final adieu to the perfumer and sought the shelter of her mother's residence in the Rue Pavée Saint-André. It was about 5 months after this return home that her friends were alarmed by her sudden disappearance for the second time. 3 days elapsed and nothing was heard of her. On the 4th, her corpse was found floating in the Seine, near the shore which is opposite the quartier of the Rue Saint-André, and at a point not very far distant from the secluded neighborhood of the Barrière du Roule.
The actual neighborhood was Weehawken, and the river was the Hudson. Right.
The atrocity of this murder, for it was at once evident that murder had been committed, the youth and beauty of the victim, and above all, her previous notoriety, conspired to produce intense excitement in the minds of the sensitive Parisians. I can call to mind no similar occurrence producing so general and so intense an effect. For several weeks in the discussion of this one absorbing theme, even the momentous political topics of the day were forgotten. The prefect made unusual exertions, and the powers of the whole Parisian police were, of course, tasked to the utmost extent. Upon the first discovery of the corpse, it was not supposed that the murderer would be able to elude for more than a very brief period the inquisition which was immediately set on foot. It was not until the expiration of a week that it was deemed necessary to offer a reward, and even then this reward was limited to 1,000 francs. In the meantime, the investigation proceeded with vigor, if not always with judgment, and numerous individuals were examined to no purpose, while, owing to the continual absence of all clue to the mystery, the popular excitement greatly increased. At the end of the 10th day, it was thought advisable to double the sum originally proposed, and at length, the second week having elapsed without leading to any discoveries, and the prejudice which always exists in Paris against the police having given vent to itself in several serious émeutes. What does that mean?
Riots.
The prefect took it upon himself to offer the sum of 20,000 francs for the conviction of the assassin, or if more than one should prove to have been implicated, for the conviction of any one of the assassins. In the proclamation setting forth this reward, a full pardon was promised to any accomplice who should come forward in evidence against his fellow, and to the whole was appended, wherever it appeared, the private placard of a committee of citizens offering 10,000 francs in addition to the amount proposed by the prefecture. The entire reward thus stood at no less than 30,000 francs, which will be regarded as an extraordinary sum when we consider the humble condition of the girl and the great frequency in large cities of such atrocities as the one described. But no one doubted now that the mystery of this murder would be immediately brought to light. But although in 1 or 2 instances arrests were made which promised elucidation, yet nothing was elicited which could implicate the parties suspected, and they were discharged forthwith. Strange as it may appear, the 3rd week from the discovery of the body had passed, and passed without any light being thrown upon the subject, before even a rumor of the events which had so agitated the public mind reached the ears of Dupin and myself. Engaged in researches which had absorbed our whole attention, it had been nearly a month since either of us had gone abroad, or received a visitor, or more than glanced at the leading political articles in one of the daily papers. The first intelligence of the murder was brought to us by G, in person. He called upon us early in the afternoon on the 13th of July in 1842, I guess, and remained with us until late in the night. He had been piqued by the failure of all his endeavors to ferret out the assassins. His reputation, so he said with a peculiarly Parisian air, was at stake. Even his honor was concerned. The eyes of the public were upon him, and there was really no sacrifice which he would not be willing to make for the development of the mystery. He concluded a somewhat droll speech with a compliment upon what he was pleased to term the tact of Dupin, and made him a direct and certainly a liberal proposition, the precise nature of which I do not feel myself at liberty to disclose, but which has no bearing upon the proper subject of my narrative. The compliment my friend rebutted as best he could, but the proposition he accepted at once, although its advantages were altogether provisional. This point being settled, the prefect broke forth at once into explanations of his own views, interspersing them with long comments upon the evidence, of which latter we were not yet in possession. He discoursed much and beyond doubt learnedly, while I hazarded an occasional suggestion as the night wore drowsily away. Dupin, sitting steadily in his accustomed armchair, was the embodiment of respectful attention. He wore spectacles during the whole interview, and an occasional glance beneath their green glasses sufficed to convince me that he slept not the less soundly, because silently, throughout the 7 or 8 leaden-footed hours which immediately preceded the departure of the prefect.
Do we? All right, I think so everybody understands what's going on. Why don't you just say, Robert, so we make sure people.
Well, I mean, my understanding is that Dupin is sleeping through the whole explanation.
Yeah, basically, that's the deal.
And after, or no, preceded. Yeah. He slept for. Yeah. All right. In the morning, I procured at the prefecture a full report of all the evidence elicited, and at the various newspaper offices, a copy of every paper in which, from first to last, had been published any decisive information in regard to this sad affair. Freed from all that was positively disproved, this mass of information stood thus. Marie Rogêt left the residence of her mother in the Rue Pavée Saint-André about 9 o'clock, or should I say Nassau?
Yeah, go ahead. Go ahead.
About 9 o'clock in the morning of Sunday, June the 22nd. In going out, she gave notice to a Monsieur Jacques Saint-Eustache, and to him only, of her intention to spend the day with an aunt who resided in the Rue des Drômes. The Rue des Drômes is a short and narrow, but populous thoroughfare not far from the banks of the river, and at a distance of some 2 miles, in the most direct course possible, from the pension of Madame Rogêt. Saint Eustache was the accepted suitor of Marie, and lodged, as well as took his meals, at the pension. He was to have gone for his betrothed at dusk, and to have escorted her home. In the afternoon, however, it came on to rain heavily, and supposing that she would remain all night at her aunt's, as she had done under similar circumstances before, he did not think it necessary to keep his promise. As night drew on, Madame Rogêt, who was an infirm old lady, 70 years of age, was heard to express a fear that she should never see Marie again. But this observation attracted little attention at the time. On Monday, it was ascertained that the girl had not been to the Rue des Drômes, and when the day elapsed without tidings of her, a tardy search was instituted at several points in the city and its environs. It was not, however, until the 4th day from the period of her disappearance that anything satisfactory was ascertained respecting her. On this day, Wednesday the 25th of June, a Monsieur Beauvais, who with a friend had been making inquiries for Marie near the Barrière du Roule, on the shore of the Seine, which is opposite the Rue Pavée Saint-André, was informed that a corpse had just been towed ashore by some fishermen, who had found it floating in the river. Upon seeing the body, Beauvais, after some hesitation, identified it as that of the perfumery girl. His friend recognized it more promptly. The face was suffused with dark blood, some of which issued from the mouth. No foam was seen, as in the case of the merely drowned. There was no discoloration in the cellular tissue. About the throat were bruises and impressions of fingers. The arms were bent over on the chest and were rigid. The right hand was clenched, the left partially open. On the left wrist were 2 circular excoriations, apparently the effect of ropes, or of a rope in more than one volution. A part of the right wrist was much chafed, as well as the back throughout its extent, but more especially at the shoulder blades. In bringing the body to the shore, the fishermen had attached to it a rope, but none of the excoriations had been affected by this. The flesh of the neck was much swollen. There were no cuts apparent or bruises which appeared the effect of blows. A piece of lace was found tied so tightly around the neck as to be hidden from sight. It was completely buried in the flesh and was fastened by a knot which lay just under the left ear. This alone would have sufficed to produce death. The medical testimony spoke confidently of the virtuous character of the deceased. She had been subjected, it said, to brutal violence. The corpse was in such condition when found that there could have been no difficulty in its recognition by friends.
Okay, we have another reader.
The dress was much torn and otherwise disordered. In the outer garment, a slip about a foot wide had been torn upward from the bottom hem to the waist, but was not torn off. It was wound 3 times around the waist and secured by a sort of hitch in the back. The dress immediately beneath the frock was of fine muslin, and from this a slip 18 inches wide had been torn entirely out, torn very evenly and with great care. It was found around her neck, fitting loosely and secured with a hard knot. Over this muslin slip and the slip of lace, the strings of a bonnet were attached, the bonnet being appended. The knot by which the strings of the bonnet were fastened was not a lady's, but a slip or sailor's knot. After the recognition of the corpse, it was not, as usual, taken to the morgue, this formality being superfluous, but hastily interred not far from the spot at which it was brought ashore. Through the exertions of Beauvais, the matter was industriously hushed up as far as possible, and several days had elapsed before any public emotion resulted. A weekly paper, however, at length took up the theme. The corpse was disinterred and a re-examination instituted, but nothing was elicited beyond what has been already noted. The clothes, however, were now submitted to the mother and friends of the deceased, and fully identified as those worn by the girl upon leaving home. Meantime, the excitement increased hourly. Several individuals were arrested and discharged. Saint Eustache fell especially under suspicion, and he failed at first to give an intelligible account of his whereabouts, during the Sunday on which Marie left home. Subsequently, however, he submitted to Monsieur G. affidavits accounting satisfactorily for every hour of the day in question. As time passed and no discovery ensued, 1,000 contradictory rumors were circulated, and journalists busied themselves in suggestions. Among these, the one which attracted the most notice was the idea that Marie Rogêt still lived, that the corpse found in the Seine was that of some other unfortunate. It will be proper that I submit to the reader some passages which embody the suggestion alluded to. These passages are literal translations from La Étoile, a paper conducted in general with much ability.
Okay, that's actually a paper called the New York Brother Jonathan. Okay, so all of these things are real. I just wanted to say that. Go ahead. Sorry.
Mademoiselle Rogêt left her mother's house on Sunday morning, June the 22nd, with the ostensible purpose of going to see her aunt or some other connection. In the Rue de Jaume, in the Rue de Jaume. From that hour, nobody is proved to have seen her. There is no trace or tidings of her at all. There has no person whatever come forward so far who saw her at all on that day, after she left her mother's door. Now, though we have no evidence that Marie Rogêt was in the land of the living after 9 o'clock on Sunday, June the 22nd, we have proof that up to that hour she was alive. On Wednesday noon at 12, a female body was discovered afloat on the shore of the Barrière de Roule. This was, even if we presume that Marie Rogêt was thrown into the river within 3 hours after she left her mother's house, only 3 days from the time she left her home, 3 days to an hour. But it is folly to suppose that the murder, if murder was committed on her body, could have been consummated soon enough to have enabled her murderers to throw the body into the river before midnight. Those who are guilty of such horrid crimes choose darkness rather than light. Thus we see that if the body found in the river was that of Marie Rogêt, it could only have been in the water 2.5 days, or 3 at the outside. All experience has shown that drowned bodies or bodies thrown into the water immediately after death by violence require from 6 to 10 days for sufficient decomposition to take place to bring them to the top of the water. Even where a cannon is fired over a corpse and it rises before at least 5 or 6 days immersion, it sinks again if let alone. Now we ask, what was there in this case to cause a departure from the ordinary course of nature? If the body had been kept in its mangled state on shore until Tuesday night, some trace would be found on shore of the murderers. It is a doubtful point also whether the body would be so soon afloat, even were it thrown in after having been dead 2 days. And furthermore, it is exceedingly improbable that any villains who had committed such a murder as here supposed would have thrown the body in without weight to sink it, when such a precaution could have so easily been taken. The editor here proceeds to argue that the body must have been in the water not 3 days merely, but at least 5 times 3 days, because it is so far decomposed that Beauvais had great difficulty in recognizing it. This latter point, however, was fully disproved. I continue the translation. What then are the facts on which M. Beauvais says that he has no doubt the body was that of Marie Rogêt? He ripped up the gown sleeve and says he found marks which satisfied him of the identity. The public generally supposed those marks to have consisted of some description of scars. He rubbed the arm and found hair upon it, something as indefinite, we think, as can readily be imagined. as little conclusive as finding an arm in the sleeve. M. Bouvet did not return that night, but sent word to Madame Rogêt at 7 o'clock on Wednesday evening that an investigation was still in progress respecting her daughter. If we allow that Marie Rogêt or Madame Rogêt, from her age and grief, could not go over, which is allowing a great deal, there certainly must have been someone by who would have thought it worthwhile to go over and attend the investigation, if they thought the body was that of Marie. Nobody went over. There was nothing said or heard about the matter in the Rue Pavier Saint-André that reached even the occupants of the same building. M. Saint-Eustache, the lover and intended husband of Marie, who boarded in her mother's house, deposes that he did not hear of the discovery of the body of his intended until the next morning, when M. Bouvet came into his chamber and told him of it. For an item of news like this, it strikes us it was very coolly received. In this way, the journal endeavored to create the impression of an apathy on the part of the relatives of Marie, inconsistent with the supposition that these relatives believed the corpse to be hers. Its insinuations amount to this, that Marie, with the connivance of her friends, had absented herself from the city for reasons involving a charge against her chastity, and that these friends, upon the discovery of a corpse in the Seine, somewhat resembling that of the girl, had availed themselves of the opportunity to impress the public with the belief of her death. But L'Etoile was again over hasty. It was distinctly proved that no apathy, such as was imagined, existed, that the old lady was exceedingly feeble, and so agitated as to be unable to attend to any duty, that Saint Eustache, so far from receiving the news coolly, was distracted with grief, and bore himself so frantically that M. Bouvet prevailed upon a friend and relative to take charge of him, and prevent his attending the examination at the disinterment. Moreover, although it was stated by L'Etoile that the corpse was reinterred at the public expense, that an advantageous offer of private sepulture was absolutely declined by the family, and that no member of the family attended the ceremonial. Although I say all this was asserted by L'Etoile in furtherance of the impression it designed to convey, yet all of this was satisfactorily disproved. In a subsequent number of the paper, an attempt was made to throw suspicion upon Bouvet himself. The editor says, "Now then, a change comes over the matter. We are told that on one occasion, while a Madame B. was at Madame Rogêt's house, M. Bouvet, who was going out, told her that a gendarme was expected there."
Gendarme, that's a policeman.
Oh, okay. And that she, Madame B., must not say anything to the gendarme until he returned, but let the matter be for him. In the present posture of affairs, M. Bouvet appears to have the whole matter locked up in his head. A single step cannot be taken without M. Bouvet, for, go which way you will, you run against him. For some reason, he determined that nobody shall have anything to do with the proceedings but himself, and he has elbowed the male relatives out of the way, according to the representations, in a very singular manner. He seems to have been very much averse to permitting the relatives to see the body.
Okay, I think we probably have to stop now because it's 6:58. Jose, you want to say anything? I'll just point out, obviously, we've begun the story. Nobody knows who killed her. There's contradictory evidence, and there are various newspapers that are really not helping.
Yeah, that's right. Well, this is it's fun because I'm trying to entertain it. It's like, yeah, what if the family did kill her? Like, I'm like, I've never read the story, right? So it's like, what if no one ever saw her in the Seine because she never left her mom's house? You know, like, it's just Or what if she is alive? I don't know. It's fun. And
It is the Hudson River, by the way. It is New York City. So
so, you know, no, this is all nowadays, like, people are so inundated with like Netflix dramas and Netflix shows, that I kind of see where they get the formula from, and they cheapen it down and dumb it down. But this, because also it's like, it's almost as if Poe is inviting you to try and figure it out yourself too, because he's just giving you like, all right, so here's all the facts as we see it so far, or here's everything laid out, to the best of our ability as we see it, right? And I don't know, the way I see it, it's like, it's not even gonna be found here, it's gonna be in between these things, or within coordinate. I don't know, I'm just kind of estimating and guessing where we're going from here.
We're reading the invention of the detective story. No one had ever written stories of this variety before. It was Edgar Poe who invented the modern detective story. Sherlock Holmes, all that other stuff come after this. And the template is what you're reading here in this instance.
Well, it's a lot of fun to do so, and I just want to let people know, of course, I guess we'll be back next week. I guess it's okay for people to read ahead, right? I mean, we can't stop.
Sure, absolutely. It's a good idea. In fact, it's a good idea for people to read this section over.
Yeah, absolutely. So, no, this was fun. I mean, I actually can't wait to do this again next week with people. So with that being said, by the way, we will be deploying tomorrow. We'll be doing some canvassing in the streets, as people call it, for my campaign. And if people would like to join, they can sign up on votevega.nyc. They can also donate and support. We need that too. And please get in touch with us, and we'll see you all next week. Or you could go to Diane's town hall right now. And 7:01, you can go over to the LaRouche organization if you want to see what Diane Sayre is up to. I actually don't know who she has on as today as her guest, but yeah. So and Dennis Speed will be doing the Saturday town hall tomorrow, I'm pretty sure. So you can get more of Dennis there as well. So with that, I'm going to close out the stream. And